So welcome back to the next stage in the Invincible Razor build. I have now managed to get all of the components installed, mounted, and overall I'd say I'm 90% done. You can say I've got the turn fins in, the rudder, the trim tabs, the stinger struts installed, prop shaft and prop are all installed. I don't have the hatch hold down. That hasn't been done yet, so I've got to do that. Obviously, I don't have a water cooling line put in yet. It's only a single rudder water line pickup. I'm going to put in a second pickup so I can have one running to the motor, one running to the ESC. Then I'll have two water outlets, one for each. So overall, the whole boat, 2 3-cell batteries and the Series Y connector harness. The whole boat weighs roughly 7.5 pounds, which is 3.5 kilograms. So here's a closer look at the stern. Here's the Speedmaster Stinger strut. I've got the Speedmaster trim tabs, Speedmaster turn fins. So I've got the trim tabs mounted and adjusted, so the bottom of the trim tab at this point is parallel to the bottom of the hull and about 2 centimeters above the bottom. So there's from the bottom of the hull here to the bottom of the trim tab, it's about a 2 millimeter gap. But for now, they're set parallel to the bottom, and then depending on driving conditions and how the boat handles, I can use the adjuster screws to drive this down into the water to bring the bow down and the stern up. The turn fins, which I've got on both sides, they're mounted so that the angle of the mount is also parallel to the angle of the bottom of the hull. So the turn fins are basically, so this angle is 90 degrees. And then the stinger strut is set up, so I've got 3/16 inch drive shaft. The gap here between the drive dog and the end of the stinger strut, this gap is a little more than 3/16. This gap has to be at least the diameter of your prop shaft. And then the Speedmaster stinger strut is adjustable. I've got about, I think it's about 3/16 up and down adjustment, just held in with the 3 bolts. That allows me to get the drive shaft either higher or lower. If I raise this, it gets more of the hull in the water, which, again, will depend on driving conditions and everything. So I've got room to adjust that. And that's done through what's called the wet well. And I'll explain that a little bit later. So that's the stern. The rubber boot for the rudder isn't all the way installed yet, but that's no big deal. Again, there's still some more work that's got to be done, including repainting, because as I filled in all of the existing holes, obviously sanding it all flat and smooth made kind of a mess. So a little bit of work. I'll get this all repainted and make it look nicer. With the turn fins, from basically the center of the mount to the tip, this is about a 45-degree angle to the transom. It's a good starting point. When you're running flat and straight, these really aren't even in the water. They're only there to help you turn more consistently. Essentially, you don't want these in the water when you're running straight and flat. So moving to the interior, we've got the Leopard motor mounted. This is the water cooling jacket. Again, obviously I don't have the water pickups plumbed yet. The motor mount is epoxied into the hull. Everything lines up nice and neat. The stuffing tube here is epoxied into a homemade stuffing tube holder that's been epoxied in and also fiberglassed over because it's just the thin plywood. So you can see the steering servo mounted here on this plate, which again I also made. This whole plate comes out, giving me access, easier access to everything on the transom, plus it gives me direct access to the entire stuffing tube. And then on both sides of the hull, I've got the battery trays. I put some adhesive backed foam on here. That is this stuff. It's basically just your craft store foam sheet that a lot of times you can get pretty much anywhere. That gives me a non-slip surface, and of course, being high density foam, it's essentially waterproof. So I've got that. These are my battery straps, just double-sided Velcro. Obviously over here is the ESC, also on its own custom-made wood platform that's epoxied into place. And you can see a little bit up front here. This is just polystyrene foam for flotation. The whole bow is full. Once I can get my hands on pool noodles, I might just use those instead. But hopefully that gives me enough flotation if needed. Obviously I still need to get the receiver in. My goal is to get it actually mounted back here, but if I do that, or even if I mount it up here, I need to get a servo extension lead, because right now the 2 wires get my receiver to fit about here, and I really don't want my receiver that close to the motor and ESC. So I've removed the servo tray. So here's the servo tray with the servo mounted. The 3 screws attach into the servo mounting brackets, which are just thin aircraft plywood that I've epoxied into place and covered. Allows me to easily get the servo in and out. So if I need to change the servo horn or anything else, I can easily do that. The servo is just held in place with the 4 screws into what's essentially just a stack of the plywood. And this piece, like all the wood pieces, have 4 coats of spar varnish to make them waterproof. And here's the ESC mounting tray. Again, it's just the plywood epoxied into place, and this put a cutout in just to maybe help with some cooling. So the next thing is the wet well and stuffing tube. So this is my 1/4" stuffing tube. I'm running the flex cable without a Teflon liner. So this is a 1/4" K&S brass tubing that then goes into down here at this end, which is epoxied into place. This is my 3/8 diameter K&S brass tubing. And then on top of that, this is actually wire insulation heat shrink tubing. There's a couple pieces on here because clear heat shrink didn't shrink down enough to the 1/4" brass, so then I put a second piece on. Hopefully that keeps that waterproof. The actual stuffing tube is only attached up here. The rest of this is allowed to move. So now, if I move my stinger strut up or down, you can see it moving a little bit inside that wet well. There's hopefully a little bit better view of how that adjustment works. So with the wet well, I can move my drive shaft up and down a little bit. So then here's the flex cable. This is the floating bushing that goes inside the strut. So when I grease this up, you gotta grease the flex cable and the floating bushing. The floating bushing just goes into the stinger strut, slides right in there. All right, so here's the flex cable. It was a lot longer when I bought it, so I had to solder the end and then cut it to length, put a little bit of a bevel on it, and then I actually put more solder on it, sanded it smooth, and now I've got a nice clean flex cable drive shaft. I had to grind a flat for the drive dog set screw, and then I have a lot of thread sticking out the end. This is the 42mm prop. I've got a couple of other props of larger diameter. As you go larger in diameter, this length gets longer, so that gives me enough room to get some different size props on if I need to. So that's the drive shaft, and it slides right through the stuffing tube and right into the coupler. Nice clean fit. So throughout the video, you may have seen a couple times that there's been some water. I actually put this in the tub last night to make sure it would float. Obviously it's not completely dry yet, but it did float with the batteries in and everything. The water line came pretty much up to about almost the top of the rudder. This was almost fully submerged. So it sat basically where I thought it would sit. Had some water leaking in through the bolt holes from the trim tabs. Those all get silicone sealed from the inside to try to keep some of the water out. And then the only problem was I didn't have the rubber boot for the rudder push rod in, so water got in through the hole. Didn't hurt anything, so I'm not worried about it. Doesn't take on water anywhere else, which is a good thing. Next thing to do is get the water cooling lines plumbed, do a little soldering to get my ESC connector to an EC5. I need to get a hatch hold down. I've got the hole for it, but I need something obviously to screw through that and into the hull. I've already got a foam seal around the hatch, so hopefully that'll work fine versus having to put some on the actual hull. I need to get a pin that'll fit in here that goes into the hole in the hull, very similar to the way the Stealth Wake works. And then, because it's the beginning of February, I gotta wait at least a month or two before this will actually see water. Plenty of time to do my painting and get the rest of this finished. So the last thing I have done for this stage is I found a receiver. I powered this up to make sure everything actually works. Got the ESC program, so I have forward and reverse, and just want to do a quick little test here. So radio is on. I'm going to plug this in. We'll probably see a little bit of a spark because of the capacitors. There we go. 6 cells. I love this sound. That's just blipping the trigger forward and reverse. I don't dare go full throttle without any load, but steering servo works. So yeah, I'm very happy. Starting to put the water lines in. Still need to get the second water pickup in. Like I said, I still have to paint it, so I don't want to go too much further than where I'm at right now. Watch for the next video.